HMN presents Harari Professionals, a program dedicated to raise awareness and inspire our youth by introducing them to successful Harari individuals.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أوركو تزيد كدرخو HMN حجاج زنا قدر زال سلامة زنا يبورد أخو كلتي سألنا أوجي لي زالين برنامج بح نتلام دخو برنامج زو تبان وأسور إبراهيم عبد الحفيظ انت. Welcome to our first episode on Harari Professionals, where we aim to connect our Harari youth to successful individuals like Dr. Magas. As always, we hope to follow along and learn some important lessons, especially if you're considering becoming a doctor. Dr. Magas, it's our pleasure to have you.
Thank you, much appreciated. Assalamu alaikum.
So, the first question I have is regarding your journey to becoming a doctor, because of course, that is a lengthy one, and there's a lot of effort you have to put through. So, can you describe what you do right now, and about the field that you're currently in now?
Yeah, Bismillah wa salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. It is a bit of a journey, just like I feel anybody who pursues any career would encounter, slightly different journey, but a journey nonetheless. So at the moment, I'm working in general practice in Melbourne. I think, is it called something different in Canada? Maybe family practice or family medicine or something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So I graduated from med school in 2010. So from 2011 onwards, I've been working in various fields in medicine, primarily working in the hospital setting. And most of that period of time would have been through the public health network. So we see a lot of acute medicine. We've seen a lot of intensive care, a lot of work on medical and surgical wards. Alhamdulillah. Then I initially thought to pursue a career in internal medicine or general medicine, and spent some time doing some specialist training, and then realized that a career in general practice would be more suited to me. So, alhamdulillah, in the last couple of years, I've been working in general practice instead.
Alhamdulillah. MashaAllah is really very inspiring to through the journey of someone who became a doctor. Just out of curiosity, how was your university like? Because in Canada and America, it's slightly different. In Australia, over there, when you said you graduated from medical school at 2010, did you do undergrad? Was it a direct medical school? Can you give us a little on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there was a lot of debate a few years ago because this very issue was something that was changing, certainly through the University of Melbourne, but almost now throughout all of Australia, nearly. Yes, so when I graduated and when I was doing medical training, when I graduated, it was an undergraduate course at the University of Melbourne. So basically, what that means is you can apply straight out of high school. Once you finish year 12, if you meet the prerequisites, then you can apply just like you can apply to any other undergraduate course. And that was a 6-year undergraduate course, and then you get your degree, and then you can go down the path of starting your internship in your career. Not many years after I graduated, well, during my time at the University of Melbourne, they had proposed and approved a plan to switch that to a postgraduate entry only. So that means people had to do an undergraduate course in something else and then apply to medicine. And I think off the top of my head, it's a 3-year postgraduate course. So that transition has occurred in the last few years. And it mirrors, I think, most of the medical schools in Australia now, where most of them are postgraduate entry only. There are still a few that are undergraduate, but the majority now are postgraduate.
Okay, mashallah. So I guess my follow-up question on that would be, so as you said, initially it was it's just one program right after high school, but now it's going to be multiple. There's an undergraduate and then a graduate. So, like, what inspired you to pick this pathway, knowing that it'll be a lengthy journey?
I often say, it's funny, you ask you very relevant questions, mashallah. It's funny because I often say, if people actually would recognize how long and how sometimes turbulent the path can be, because it certainly for me anyway, maybe I was a little bit unaware potentially. The thought is it's a 6-year course or a postgraduate course, so usually 4 and 3 or something like that, and then that's it. You're done. You're set, and your career blossoms from that point onwards. And that in and of itself isn't quite right, actually. So I think it actually mirrors a lot of the other professional careers out there, like engineering or architecture or accounting or law or any of the other things that are out there through the professional field, is that once you have a degree in medicine, you're more or less almost guaranteed a job, but even that it's not quite to the word the case anymore, because there is a significant, they do say that there's a medical shortage of medical professionals in Australia, which I think is probably similar elsewhere as well. However, the shortage they don't actually say is really in the remote and rural parts of Australia. I'm not sure if you're aware, but around 85% of Australia is almost desert and difficult to inhabit, but there are populations there. And for the most part, people who are from metropolitan Australia, from the capital cities where the majority of the population is concentrated, there's a reluctance, understandably so, to work in a remote and rural area. So you have majority of the population generally in metropolitan areas. You have medical practitioners wanting to work in metropolitan areas. So you have a concentration of either general practitioners, physicians, surgeons, anesthetists, intensive care specialists. There's a set number of jobs. These roles do not expand. Like the government or private entities can't pay for 10 extra doctors every year. It doesn't happen. So you have a set number of roles. If those roles are filled, then as a new graduate, where exactly are you going to go? Where you've got a full quota in the metropolitan areas and you've got basically, easily or relatively easily available jobs in rural and remote areas. So those jobs are there, nonetheless, for the most part. It's not very enticing, especially for people who are not of a Caucasian or background. So Muslim, from an African background, Ethiopian, Harari like us, other Muslim people, you can have Sri Lankan people, you can have people with Malaysian, Indian background. They've got their family, they've got their community, they've got very strong links to their masajid. They've got very strong links. They're very much often entrenched in that area because that's their support network, and it's very important for us. Whereas for people who are, sort of Anglo-Saxon or Caucasian in background, they've been in Australia for generations. They don't quite, they have some reliance on their family, sure, but they don't have that same links to community, links to their masjid, because they're what masjid. Those links are not as deep. So for them to find an opportunity in a rural area that's 1,000 kilometers away from home is less of a challenge overall compared to what it would be for us. So I know it's a long-winded answer to probably a very simple question that you asked, and I've gone on a few tangents, and I don't know where I am now. Nonetheless, I think in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is the road is arduous even after you've graduated, and I believe it's similar in any other career that people would pursue.
Oh, definitely, I would say that because, personally, me, I'm studying engineering. I know others who do business, who graduate from business, and that's like the beginning of hardship. Many people think when you graduate, that's it, you've achieved it. You got your degree,
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
really, that's the beginning. It's like now you have it. What could you do next, right?
Exactly. 100%.
So, so you're saying for you it's actually harder for you to get it. Um, so like, what made you continue on it? Did you know this after the fact, or did you know this before the fact?
It was after the fact. Well and
After the
truly
fact.
after the fact. Yeah.
So and before that, it was. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, please go.
Okay, so before that, you still had this idea that becoming a medical doctor, it's like almost guaranteed because it's the best of all the jobs and well paid. Um, so is that what is your ignorance of it that pushed you forward, or was it something else behind it that wanted you to become a doctor, that made you have that passion to become a doctor, right? There's
Yeah,
something else
yeah,
that you have to push through to break the obstacles and say, you know what, regardless of what happens, I want to become a doctor.
yeah. I understand what you mean. I think the thing is with whatever career you choose, there need to be aspects of that career that you find fulfilling from a personal, from a professional, and from a religious perspective as well. So if you manage to, regardless of what you're doing, and in any way you're able to justify, yes, there is something that drives me to continue this, not blindly and not at all costs, because at the end of the day, for us as Muslims, in my mind anyway, maybe I'm wrong, but that idea or the philosophy of pursue your dream at all costs, I find that a little bit hard to swallow, because if those costs that you lose happen to be, for instance, family, for instance, your link with Allah, your career isn't really worth that. And I think in a Western society, those facets are not quite as important as it is for us. And sometimes we need some gentle reminders to say, our careers are important, yes. Future perspectives, etc., etc. Like they're important, but that concept of at all costs, we have to reevaluate, I think, and what costs are we actually willing to give up to achieve our goals, and are they worth it? Are the you sort of balance, what am I losing in pursuing this to this degree? Am I losing my link with Allah? Am I not praying regularly? Am I not attending the masjid when I'm meant to? Am I not fasting, because my hours in whatever role I'm doing are just not enabling me to? And is this like a very short period of time, or is this seeming to be very prolonged? So these are the things that we have to balance when we say, at what cost do we proceed with this? And then you think about it from a personal perspective. How much are you stimulated by this job? How passionate are you? And when you talk about medicine, it's some of the things that run through your mind is, does it feel like a day-to-day grind, and you're not really stimulated by what you're doing, and you're not feeling like you're making any change in people's lives? And you can't really answer this in one day, because sometimes you have a really horrendous day in whatever field that you're doing, and your answers are no, 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 then you make an on the spot crazy decision. Well, you never do that. But if you feel, for instance, in my situation, if I feel passionate about hearing other people's stories and their journey in their health and well-being. If you feel like you're making a change or you're able to affect that journey in a positive way for them, when you see the effect of your assistance, your just even lending an ear, and they find comfort in that, alhamdulillah. If your niyyah is at the end of the day to attain the pleasure of Allah in whatever it is that you're doing, helping other people in construction, in engineering, in law, if you're actually finding that what you're doing is beneficial and your niyyah is in the right place, then that's all the important things, and that is often more than enough for you to keep going and pursuing your dream. But like I said at the start, at the end of the day, you always have to balance that with what it is that you're sacrificing. And if you're sacrificing your deen, if you're sacrificing your needs to your family, then you have to sort of have a bit of a think about where the priorities are.
MashaAllah, very, very well said. And I would say the same thing. If your passion is to get money, I want to become a doctor because it's the highest paying job. Then there will be times when that would seem impossible, and there will be other financially optimistic pathways to choose from. And you would just go here around to see
Absolutely.
where's the biggest money.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But then when you see that, I'm trying to become a doctor because this community needs, medical practitioners and some specialty or the likes, or that's, I want to become an engineer because we need to solve such and such of a problem, then that keeps them going, because as long as that problem isn't solved, you always you still you're getting closer. You're telling yourself, it's stuff, but then the end goal is there. But when you put
Absolutely.
money as your main target, it just money is everywhere. Sometimes there are easier pathways, being in the right place at the right time, right? There's some people who just happen to be there at the right time and
Yeah.
just make money. So you want to have something, steadfast to the whole.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%.
It's very, very well said over there. So now, so we've talked about, the journey, because, like, how you obtain that passion and persevere in it. But now you're a doctor, right? What's your current passion right now as a doctor? Maybe if you can begin explaining what you do in, day to day,
Yeah.
and then why you do it, or what's the passionate thing about that makes you want to go to work. And,
Yeah. Yeah. So, as we said at the start, I'm working in general practice now, or I think in some places called family practice. So it's essentially outside of the hospital setting, so in a clinic setting. So primary care. So basically, whenever somebody needs to go and see their family doctor, that would be me. So you see things basically at the first presentation. So if anybody has any sort of illness or is unwell in any way, unless they're critically unwell, where they generally call an ambulance and go to emergency. Anything outside of that, you would attend your general practitioner. So one of the main passions that I have about general practice now is, and I probably have more of an appreciation for it since sort of practicing in this field, is the variety of medical presentations that you see. So for instance, in an hour, you might see 4 or 5 people and they would have 4 or 5 completely different problems that they have to deal with. For instance, the first person might have a problem with their toe, the second person might be having hearing loss, the third person might be having some numbness and tingling in their arm, the fourth person might need to have a driver's license form filled out for medical reasons. The fifth person might be a 12-month-old who needs their vaccines. So it's every few minutes, it's a totally different thing that you're dealing with. So that variety of practice, that breadth of practice is, really, it keeps you, I wouldn't use the word entertain because that's people's lives we're talking about, but it's interesting and stimulating, basically. The second point is when you compare it with some other specialties in medicine, particularly as a physician, which I had a little bit of experience in. Generally speaking, you don't see somebody, if someone's unwell, you're not the first person they see as a physician. So either a general practitioner has seen them and assessed them, has performed some tests like some blood tests or a scan or some sort, and then had to think about what's going on and rationalize and whatnot. And then they've kind of narrowed down to maybe 2 or 3 different problems that it might be, but they're still unsure. And then they would refer that person on to a specialist. So a whole heap of the groundwork and the thinking has already been done for you as a physician, for instance. And all you have to do is basically look through what's already been done and see, is there something that's been missed? Whereas as a general practitioner, you're actually doing a lot of the groundwork, and that is a lot more stimulating than picking something up when 80-85% of the work's already done. There's not that much thought that needs to be put through. I mean, there's thought, but you're not starting from scratch, so to speak. So that part is excellent with regards to general practice. The third aspect of general practice that I really enjoy is the fact that I'm not in a hospital anymore. So hospital life, if that's your long-term career, all power to you, mashallah. I find it can be very draining. It can be very thankless. There's lots of unpaid, unrostered overtime. There's a lot of on-calls that you have to do, where your sleep-wake cycle, basically, how you call it, you have a sleep-wake cycle. Oftentimes when you're doing on-call rosters, it's not really a cycle. It's a sleep-wake disaster, basically. It's just all over the place. So there's a lot of things about general practice, not just from a professional or from a practical or from a medical perspective, but from a lifestyle perspective, that's a lot more enticing than some of the other specialties that are out there. And part of that is a really good work-life balance. So you can set your own hours a lot better. So if you, for instance, for me, whenever I go to a new general practice clinic and say, oh, we're starting to negotiate a contract, I'll always tell them Fridays, for instance, either the whole day off or the afternoon off, at least from 12 o'clock onwards. I'm not going to see patients. I'm going to the masjid, I'm going to pray my Friday prayer, and then I'm going home. You can't really say that when you're working in the hospital, because they'll just look at you and say, no, sorry, you just do the hours that we tell you to do. Ma'as-salama. Whereas in general practice, you've got a lot more control over your hours, over your days. You can work full-time, you can work part-time. The flexibility for women, for parents, for mothers is a lot better. So those are the aspects of general practice that I find, and there's probably more things out there, but those are kind of the basic things that come to mind. Obviously, other parts of medicine, other specialties have their pros and cons as well, just like everything in life. But for me personally, I find that the balance I enjoy a lot more in general practice.
Very well said, inshallah. Okay, so if you can just so that the audience can have a better picture of your path in becoming a doctor, if you can just maybe list 1 or 2 challenges you faced, all the way from when you enrolled in medical school till your 10 year experience right now, like 1 or 2 challenges you faced and how you've handled it, and if it were to come again, how would you react to it, right?
Yeah. So there's challenges in everything in life. and how you handle it. SubhanAllah. It's a part of it is going to be maturity, a part of it is going to be what stage of life you're in, a part of it is how much support is around you. There's a lot of aspects to how you handle the challenges that you're faced with. A part of it's going to be how sleep deprived you are. So yeah, look, I mean, in medicine, there's obstacles, particularly in the hospital setting, particularly in some fields. The challenges might be a lot more professional based. So, for instance, I think in surgical fields, there's a lot more pressure to conform, a lot more pressure to work outside your comfort zones and appease people in high positions so you can advance in your career. Less so of a problem in physician training, but it certainly is there. In general practice, that's almost non-existent, which is good. Your progress in your career is a lot more based on your merit and your performance rather than how you interact and how you appease other people, which is good. So that's a particular challenge in hospital specialties, unfortunately. How I dealt with it, or I really didn't. It wasn't something that I was comfortable doing, so I just ignore that part. I wouldn't really appease. I'm not somebody that would appease other people for the sake of my career. So it's really either you progress on merit or you don't. There's a lot of people I saw around me that progressed not on merit. I'll tell you a story, for example, if we have time. We were prepared, so we'd completed so there's two, well, here in Australia anyway, for the Royal Australian College of Physicians, there's two groups of exams, two sets of exams. One's the written exam, you do that one first, and then you have the sort of practical exam. So we'd pass, you could do it in every year. There's a group that does these exams, so it's an annual thing. So for our year, just a few years ago, a group of us, most of us passed the written exams, and then we were preparing for the clinical, we call them the clinical exams or the practical exams. In preparation for that, I remember one of the directors of our training, she sat us all down and said, look, we know you're all preparing for, and we were relatively senior in the hospital setting at that stage. We were medical registrars and neurology registrars and whatnot. So she said, look, we know everybody's stressed because you're preparing for the clinical exams. We know that, because what you would do generally is you'd form little groups of 2 or 3. This is during your work hours. So when I look back and I say, how? When you're meant to be working, and work is insanely busy because people are sick in hospital and the stuff that you're doing is nonstop. But nonetheless, within those times, magically you're meant to produce free time for you to study outside of when you're at home. Because when you're preparing for your clinical exams, this is a practical exam, which means it is an exam based on a person. Like you're not writing down answers. It's basically like a performance. For instance, they'll give you a patient and they'll say you've got 8 or 9 minutes. You need to perform a cardiac exam from head to toe, like focus on cardiac things. You need to pick up the very subtle abnormalities that are there. You need to discuss your findings with the examiner, and then they'll ask you a bunch of questions. They'll show you a scan, they'll show you an ECG or an echocardiogram or something, and then you'll need to interpret that, and then they'll basically give you a mark based on what you've done. So you need to practice on people. So this is not an exam where you can easily practice at home. You need to be in the hospital setting to practice this. Now you're in the hospital, you're actually looking after patients who are unwell. And yet, like I said, magically you're supposed to find these extra hours every day where you can also study and practice with consent. Like, you're not walking up to somebody randomly and just practicing on this is borderline. It's not criminal, but it's not ethical. So you obviously get their consent and say, I'm preparing, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I like that. She sat us down and she said, we know you're practicing for these exams. We need to tell you guys that you need to make sure you prioritize your actual work. You need to look after your patients at the highest caliber. You can't spend time that you would otherwise with patients studying, because, you know, you're not putting lives at risk, but you're giving slightly substandard care if you're kind of sacrificing your time that you would otherwise spend with patients for your exams. Fair enough. She sat everybody down and she said this, fair enough. It makes total sense. So I was buddied up with a colleague of mine in the emergency department. We were working as admission officers. Basically, what a patient will do in this hospital would be they'd come in, they're unwell, they come to emergency. The emergency doctors assess them. They'll say, look, this person's unwell. They need to go in onto the ward. Let's call the medical registrar and they'll come and sort this all out. So they would call either me or my colleague, because we were both working in the same role at the same time. I tell you, during these clinical exams, this chap would disappear. Gone. So he's off on the ward studying where he's not really meant to be, because it was very clear that you actually need to fulfill the role as a medical professional that you are contracted to do. And they've given us a reminder at the start of preparing for these exams. So I'm doing so it's meant to be, the workload's meant to be split 50-50. I'm doing about 75, he's doing about 25. He's disappearing often. And people know, if you do stuff like that, it's not hidden. People know, the emergency doctors knew, the specialists knew, the physicians knew. Nobody did anything. Nobody said a word. He passed his exams with flying, well, I don't know. He passed his exams and he's gone on to become a specialist in whatever field. But the point is, sometimes in whatever field you're in, hierarchy will say particular things, and then what you find the reality is very different. So one of the lessons I learned, and this is going a roundabout way to say, one of the key lessons I learned, and probably the most important lesson for me in medicine was, there's not always, but there's often something underhand at play. We may not necessarily know what it is. It may be systemic, but not everything in terms of your career and your progress, not everything is often as it seems. Just because somebody in a high position tells you something, it doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to happen. Oftentimes there's some underhand things at play. And the key thing is you don't get emotional or upset about it. You just say, look, I've followed, as long as for yourself, you've maintained your professionalism and your integrity, you've performed your role as what you're expected to do, above what you're expected to do even, people will appreciate you for that, as in people who matter. It doesn't necessarily mean the hierarchy will appreciate you. It doesn't necessarily mean your managers will appreciate you, but the people who are important will appreciate you, the patients you've looked after, the colleagues who are always under stress and are overworked will appreciate you. And if you're doing the right thing from what you're supposed to be doing, from your contract, from your medical legal perspective, from a personal professional standard perspective, you're actually just doing your job to the best of your capability, and your nia is to pursue that, then you will achieve or receive your reward from Allah. And that's the key thing. Maintain your standards, do your job in the best of your capabilities. Don't take shortcuts, because if you do, in the dunya, you might be able to get to this or that, etc. But eventually it'll go around to bite you in the bottom. And I know there's been some issues with this chap. He's not in this state anymore. He's in interstate. I know there's been some issues with this particular chap and his professional standards, even since he's fully not graduated, but fully specialized as a physician. There's been lots of concerns raised about him. So whenever you take shortcuts in that sense, in a short-term view, it might look very enticing, but from all perspectives, it doesn't end well. So the main thing I do have to say in terms of the challenges would be, hierarchy and issues about progressing in your career. Don't get disheartened if people are taking shortcuts around you and you feel like you need to as well. Just do the right thing.
MashaAllah, very, very well said. It reminded me of the hadith Prophet ﷺ. He said, "Man ghashana falaysa minna," the one who deceives and he's not from us. And so you can, yeah, you're right. You can just cheat your way, up to a certain point, but after that, the truth will unveil, and you'll be a loser in the end. Really, right? You didn't succeed.
Absolutely, it always comes back to bite you, and we see it all the time. It always comes back, and often when it comes back to bite you, it bites you a lot worse than what you did, like the shortcuts that you took initially. So you just generally, it's not about not cheating the system. Don't cheat yourself. Don't cheat Allah, because it's not within the characteristics of a Muslim. That's
Exactly.
the key thing.
Many people say don't cheat the system, but really, it's not about the system. Just don't cheat your own self.
It's
right?
not. It's not. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Very well said. So that was like a very good like example of one aspect that we should persevere on. Just to conclude, what advice do you have for the future generations? Any tips and tricks? Like you mentioned this and maybe other things. Any sort of points that those who want to become a doctor they should consider, and maybe those who don't want to become a doctor, maybe they have other career pathways.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for those who want to become a doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of the key things we may have already mentioned. So one is always holding steadfast to your deen and to your family. I don't think there's anything that's more important than that. If you find that you're drifting away, you're feeling that your relationship with Allah isn't as strong as what it was or how you would like it to be, you need to reconnect with Allah. You need to attend the masajid. You need to, and the environment is key. So if you're surrounded by people that are constantly pursuing the dunya, I mean, in and of itself, it's not an inherently wrong thing. But if they're constantly pursuing the dunya with a degree of neglect of the akhirah, that environment, generally, we're human beings, we're products of our environment. So we need to reconsider our environment and see, I need to be around in an environment where it's more that link. I need to work on my link with Allah. That's critical. And Allah says in the Quran, so holding on to the hab of Allah is critical, because that will enable you to approach any problem in your career with such a degree of confidence, because you say, look, if it happens, it happens, alhamdulillah. If it doesn't, then Allah has something better for me in store down the track. And then the second part of the ayah is probably my second point, is وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. So iftiraq in our within ourselves, in our communities, and I'm talking about in the Muslim community, and you can subdivide that however we like, but it's so important for us to agree to disagree on so many things, and that's okay, because throughout the Muslim history, the greatest alims have always agreed to disagree. That's why there's four madahib, or four major madahib. It's And the alims of those times would say, go and listen to the fatwa of this other great alim. He is more correct than me. It's okay for everybody to have their own understanding of certain minute points, as long as it's not well outside the deen. But the key thing is, don't make iftiraq. Don't fight and cause divisions amongst us, because it's the divisions amongst us that's really causing the detriment of our community. So I think that's probably my second point is even as a because as a professional, you're still a member of the community, and um, what's a good way to put this? It's important no matter what role you have, and this is a universal thing in my mind. It doesn't matter what role you have. You have in terms of professionally, you can play a part in either helping the community or harming the community. And it's always a better option to spread good vibes, spread togetherness. We don't all have to be doing exactly the same thing, but just understand that whatever that person is doing has basis, has an understanding in the deen that is within the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Accept that, appreciate that. Don't cause fitna in our community. I feel that's very important in terms of advice. The third thing would be um, sort of make sure you really keep your links with people who are important. So in my life, my parents, alhamdulillah, my wife and young daughter, alhamdulillah, keep your links with your extended relatives, keep your links with if you had attended a Saturday school, like for myself, Quran Day, which from my childhood I used to attend, which is still running in its current capacity potentially under Zoom because of lockdown, but nonetheless, it's important to keep your connections with your Harari community. It's so critical because the problem that we're having, I see myself anyway, is somewhat an identity crisis where we're surrounded by people of different backgrounds, and sometimes we're not sure where we fit in that context. So it's very important to know who we are, what we stand for from a Diniya perspective, from a Harari perspective. Be comfortable in your own skin. We don't need to try to imitate other people because we've got our own thing, alhamdulillah. So it's key to be comfortable in our own skin. Be comfortable in understanding that we are different. I'm born and raised in Melbourne, and almost every day somebody will come into my clinical room and say, so at the end of the consult, they'll say, so where are you from again? So I'm from Harar in Ethiopia. So, oh, but we don't know where that is, but you sound kind of like us. Yeah, I was born in Melbourne. So, oh, so you're Australian? No. If I was Australian, you wouldn't ask me where I was from. Just like you don't ask Bill from the pub across the road. So we need to understand and appreciate where we're from, who we are, embrace that. Because the more, if we ever try to be someone else, nobody from that someone else is ever going to accept you as within that group. There's always a degree of otherization. You're different. We can't put a finger, or they can often put a finger, but sometimes they might not mention how you're different. But they know and we know that there's a difference there. And then you may think everything's buddy-buddy at a point, but eventually some of that comes out. So that third point I wanted to make in a roundabout way was, let's be comfortable in our own skin, know that we're different from others, appreciate our difference, be comfortable in that, grow those links with our families, strengthen those links with our families, grow those links within our community, and not try to be someone who we're not. Not to say that don't try to fit in, of course, but understand that we have our deen and our culture that helps us sort of ground ourselves in an identity that is a bit different to others. Those are probably the 3 points that come to mind.
Yeah, all of them were really great, but one of them that really stuck in more, which I think people have more connection to, regardless of whether they're headed or not, is you keep your connections with your relatives and extended relatives, because as a doctor, that is going to be a busy profession anyway. So if you do not have that connection, it's very easy for you to get carried on and be busy with things. I've heard of stories where there'll be one person is a doctor, but then their auntie or grandparents or whatever is sick, and
Yeah.
They're busy in one thing, not knowing that someone else is sick, right? To
Yeah.
give them a personal, like not from a doctor's perspective, but like a personal advice, no knowledge.
Yeah.
So just that comes from not connecting, from thinking that you're too busy, which it is a busy field, but also don't forget this, as he said.
Absolutely.
So that was really, really, really well said on that. Yeah. So Jazakallah khairan for the interview. Really well said, and there's a lot to learn from your experiences and journeys. May Allah make you a role model for us Hadithis and to better our Hadithi youth in specific. And yeah,
Well, we're all role models for each other at the end of the day. We're all students in this. We're all learning off each other. We need to learn from our elders as well. That's a critical point. So, no, I mean, oftentimes a problem that I have is that there's some thought in the community to say, a medical profession is superior to everything else. Well, there's nothing like this. Everybody in whatever career they're in, we need to be leaders in that career. I mean, when I say leaders in that career, I mean do the critical things that make you good in that profession. Do them well, do them to the best of your ability. Keep your integrity, keep your links to your deen, keep your links to your family, and just be good, generally a good person. And we all learn from each other. We're all leaders in our own way. We're all students in our own way. There's no one profession that's bigger than the other. At the end of the day, we're all on the same level playing field, and it's all the relationship that we have in Allah at the end of the day, and the taqwa that in Allah and our ikhlas that differentiates all of us. So inshallah, Allah grant us ikhlas, and yeah, I appreciate the opportunity that you've provided, giving us this platform, and I appreciate the questions that you've put forth, and it's been a good discussion. Alhamdulillah.
as you said, intentions.
Exactly.
So thanks for the presentation. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Jazakallah khairan for all those watching forth. We hope you can have some benefit on this, and if you would like to request anything for future episodes, just let us know. We're always open to your comments. Jazakallah khairan one last time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.